Ever get that feeling like you think you know something pretty well, like you've got a decent grasp on it,
Yeah.
and then suddenly something comes along and just totally flips your understanding on its head?
Oh, for sure.
It happened to me recently, really big time, digging into well, something that's always fascinated me, land ownership here in India.
Right.
I mean, we all have this sort of general picture in our minds, don't we? The government's the big player, owns a ton of land, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
And then you often hear, well, whispers sometimes even outright statements that the Waqf Board comes next, when it comes to non-governmental land.
It's a very common perception
Mm-hmm.
that the Waqf Board holds this huge, like the second largest chunk of non-governmental land.
Yeah, yeah.
Given their role managing all those properties,
Right.
dedicated to religious and charitable causes, within the Islamic tradition, it's kind of a logical assumption, I guess, a lot of people would just make.
Makes sense, right? It's almost become like a common knowledge, hasn't it?
It really has, yeah.
Yeah. But then I stumbled upon this piece in the Organizer. This was from April 3rd, 2025.
Okay.
And honestly, it just stopped me in my tracks.
Really?
Get this, according to this article, the Catholic Church in India actually holds a mind-blowing, get ready for it, 17.29 crore acres.
Wow.
Now, for those of us not fluent in, big Indian numerical units, that's 172.9 million acres, or to put it another way, a staggering 7 crore hectares.
That's enormous.
It's a number so massive it's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
It is. It's hard to visualize that much land.
Absolutely.
To even start to grasp the sheer scale of that. Think about the Indian government's land holdings for a second, right?
Right, yeah.
As of February 2021, the Government Land Information website, they reported, their holdings at about 15,531 square kilometers.
Right.
Spread across all sorts of ministries and public sector companies.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're by far the largest landowner in the country, no question.
Right.
But when you put those figures side by side, I mean, it throws the sheer scale of the church's non-governmental holdings into really sharp relief.
It really does.
It's fascinating because it really makes you rethink what you thought you knew about how land is distributed in India
Exactly.
outside of, direct state control.
And here's another, another pretty eye-popping figure.
Oh, okay.
Get this, the estimated value of all this land held by the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Apparently, we're talking somewhere in the region of ours, 20,000 crore.
Seriously.
It's a sum that could, shall we say, fuel quite a lot of initiatives.
You could say that again.
It really begs the question, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How on earth did such a massive amount of land end up under the church's ownership?
Yeah, especially
Especially with all the recent conversations and all the legislative changes we've been seeing around the Waqf Board's properties.
exactly. It's a really good question.
Makes you think about the historical, the historical pathways that led to this kind of distribution,
It does. Yeah, and to understand this, I think we really need to go back in time a bit
Okay.
to the period of British rule.
Okay.
And specifically, there's a piece of legislation, the Indian Church Act of 1927.
Okay.
This act played a very significant role in facilitating the transfer of really substantial land grants to the church.
So let's break this down a little bit.
Yeah.
So during the time the British were calling the shots, there was this actual deliberate process of giving all this land to the church.
That's right.
What was the thinking behind that? And then how did the church actually use all these land grants?
Well, the British colonial administration, they often tried to work with established institutions.
Right.
And religious bodies weren't an exception to that.
Yeah.
These land grants were often intended to really bolster the church's activities, in particular, setting up missionary outposts.
Okay.
These outposts served as kind of centers of influence. Then you had educational institutions aimed at, shaping young minds, and healthcare facilities, designed to provide services all over the country.
Yeah, yeah.
This period was, a real time of expansion for the church's footprint throughout India.
And they really did build a pretty extensive network, didn't they?
They did. It was vast.
I mean, the article mentioned some really impressive figures from, I think this was around 2012.
Okay.
We're talking over 2,457 hospital dispensaries providing health care, 240 medical and nursing colleges, training future professionals, 28 general colleges,
Wow.
5 engineering colleges, and then thousands upon thousands of secondary schools, primary schools, even nursery schools.
That's incredible.
3,765 secondary schools, 7,319 primary schools, and 3,187 nursery schools.
That's a huge contribution.
The sheer scale of their contribution to education and healthcare, especially in reaching those underserved communities, it's really something.
It is. And, those institutions, they really became part of the fabric of India,
Right.
providing these essential services, particularly in areas where, maybe the government infrastructure wasn't quite as developed.
Yeah.
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 The land holdings were absolutely essential in building and then maintaining this vast, vast network of service.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting to see how land ownership directly translates into social impact
For sure.
across a whole nation.
Now, let's shift gears for a moment.
Okay.
Let's talk about the Waqf Board for a bit.
Right.
For the longest time, as we've said, the general understanding has been that they were the second largest non-governmental landholder, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what were their approximate holdings, historically, and how do those numbers look now?
Yeah, historically, figures around, 9.4 lakh acres were often quoted
Yeah.
when people talked about the Waqf Board's land.
Okay.
However, more recent data, and this was highlighted in the article, based on what Home Minister Amit Shah said during the Waqf Amendment Bill debate
Right.
back in April 2025, it seems that figure's grown significantly.
Okay.
It's now approximately 39 lakh acres.
So it's still a considerable amount of land.
Oh, absolutely.
But I guess fundamentally, this land ownership is quite different from how the church holds its land, isn't it? It serves a different purpose.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
The Waqf Board's land is made up of properties that are specifically dedicated to Islamic, religious, or charitable purposes,
Right.
and they're managed according to the principles of Waqf law under the Waqf Act of 1995.
Got it.
The idea behind these endowments is to benefit the Muslim community,
Yeah.
and that often means using the properties for things like mosques,
Right.
religious schools, graveyards,
Uh-huh.
and other kinds of community-focused facilities.
Interesting. So a totally different legal and religious framework governing these properties.
That's right. Very different from other religious institutions.
The article also mentioned a pretty sharp increase in the Waqf Board's land ownership, particularly in recent years.
Yeah, it's quite noticeable.
It pointed out that while it took about a century for their holdings to reach 18 lakh acres, from 1913 to 2013,
100?
yeah, they added another 21 lakh acres in just the last 12 years.
Wow, that's a rapid expansion.
It is. It makes you wonder what's driving that.
It does. It's a notable acceleration, and that rapid growth, I think, has probably contributed to, the increased scrutiny and all the discussion around managing Waqf properties.
Right.
But even so, when we compare these figures to the Catholic Church's holdings, that massive 17.29 crore acres versus the Waqf Board's 39 lakh,
Right.
the difference is just, frankly, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's hard to even fathom.
It really makes you reassess what you thought you knew about land ownership by religious bodies in India.
For sure.
I mean, it challenges that perception, that widely held perception
Absolutely.
about, who the big non-governmental landowners are.
And the article uses some pretty vivid analogies to illustrate this, like comparing a scooter to a private jet.
Yeah, I saw.
Or the budget of a big Bollywood blockbuster to the much smaller budget of a street play.
Right.
It really drives home the point about the difference in the sheer volume of land.
It does. It's an effective way to get that point across.
We're talking about the church holding well over 44 times the amount of land the Waqf Board has.
It's incredible when you put it like that.
Now, this is where things get a little more controversial.
Okay.
The Organiser article kind of takes a turn and suggests that maybe some of the ways the Catholic Church acquired its land weren't entirely above board. What are the allegations they bring up?
Well, the article expresses concern about the methods used by some church-affiliated institutions to acquire land.
Yeah.
It suggests that things like offering free medical checkups or school books might have been used to encourage conversions to Christianity in certain communities.
Okay.
And that these conversions were then followed by transfers of land to, entities connected to the church.
So the suggestion is that these acts of charity were, in some cases, potentially a way to acquire land, especially from more vulnerable communities like tribal or rural populations.
That's the implication, yeah, a serious accusation.
And the article goes on to actually mention multiple cases of illegal land acquisitions allegedly linked to these conversion activities.
Yeah, but it's interesting that they don't provide any specific details, do they?
No, I noticed that too. No case numbers, court rulings, or even specific locations.
All quite general.
It is. It's all very, well, vague, I guess you could say.
It paints a picture of potential wrongdoing, but it doesn't really offer much concrete evidence.
Right, right.
Legal citations or specific examples to back up those claims.
Yeah, yeah.
It does say, though, that the church would likely deny these practices,
Uh-huh.
but it maintains that these allegations persist in some parts of the country.
This is all happening, of course, against the backdrop of the recent passage of the Waqf Amendment Bill.
Right.
How do you think this timing plays into things?
Well, it's certainly interesting timing.
Yeah.
The Waqf Amendment Bill, which was passed in early April 2025,
Right.
it was all about bringing more accountability and transparency to how Waqf properties are managed across India.
Okay.
It tried to remove certain clauses that were controversial
Mm-hmm.
and to provide clearer ways to challenge things legally.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that the BJP government was very positive about this bill,
Yeah, yeah.
especially in Kerala, which has a significant Christian population.
And this is where the Manambam protest case comes in, right?
Yes,
The
exactly.
one in Kochi, where a number of Christian families were facing claims on land they'd bought decades ago from Farooq College.
Right. The Kerala State Waqf Board asserted ownership.
And the Catholic Church got involved, didn't they? They were supporting these families.
They were, yes.
In fact, they played a pretty prominent role in advocating for them.
They did. The Catholic Church really stood up for those families in Munambam.
Around 600 families, right?
Yeah, about 600 Christian families.
Living on 400 acres they'd bought back in the 1960s.
And they were facing potential eviction.
It's really interesting how, with the Waqf Board under so much scrutiny and with all these changes happening, and then the church being so vocal in this very public land dispute, and then suddenly, boom, this information comes out in the Organiser, highlighting the church's massive land holdings and raising all these allegations.
It's quite a coincidence, isn't it?
It feels like, well, it feels like more than a coincidence, you know?
Yeah, the timing is certainly suggestive.
Could this be, I don't know, a sign of things to come?
It's possible.
Like, will the same kind of scrutiny that's been directed at the Waqf Board now be applied to other large landholders?
It's a valid question.
Including, maybe the Catholic Church.
It wouldn't be surprising.
It feels like the whole conversation around land ownership by religious institutions is, well, it's shifting.
It really does.
It's a huge issue, and it's obviously tied up with the incredibly complex history of land ownership in India and the legacy of all those British-era land laws.
Laws that still have an impact today.
The article even mentions the government's attempt back in 1965 to invalidate some of those British-era leases.
Right.
But it sounds like enforcing that has been, well, a nightmare.
A huge challenge, for sure.
And many of those old arrangements are still around.
They've persisted in various forms.
It's important to remember, too, that these controversies aren't limited to just one religious body.
Exactly.
The article points out the case of the Tirukudurai Temple in Tamil Nadu, where the Waqf Board is making claims.
Yeah, that's a good example.
It shows that these complex and, well, often quite sensitive disputes, they involve lots of different religious institutions.
They do, and they have historical roots.
That case, the one with the temple, it involves a temple that dates back to the Chola dynasty.
Centuries old.
Yeah, it just highlights how complicated these issues can be.
It really does, and how much history is tied up in them.
So, to sum it all up, the real takeaway here is the sheer scale of the Catholic Church's land ownership in India. Those 17.29 crore acres compared to the Waqf Board's 39 lakh acres.
That's a huge difference.
It completely challenges our understanding of who the major non-governmental landowners are.
And the historical roots of this, those land grants from the British era.
It's fascinating, and with the recent Waqf Amendment Bill and all the discussions around that, you have to wonder what's next.
It does make you wonder.
Will the spotlight now turn to the church's land? Will there be investigations?
It's definitely possible.
We've uncovered something really significant here.
We have. It's a whole other layer of complexity.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes.
It's fascinating how much history plays into the present.
It is. It makes you think, what will the future implications of all this be?
Big question, and one that deserves more attention.
This whole issue of land control in India, the role of religious institutions.
It's a crucial part of understanding how India is evolving.
It is, and we need to dig deeper, explore the history of land laws, look at the impact of these large land holdings.
Absolutely. It's essential for a nuanced perspective on India's development.
Really makes you think about the power dynamics at play.
For sure.
Food for thought, isn't it?
It is a lot to consider.
Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep questioning the things you think you know.
Always.
Bye for now.